My name is Scott Shapiro. I work with Mayor Jim Gray, and over the last 3 years, we've been working on a study of our traffic patterns downtown, looking at the impacts of converting our one-way streets to two-way. This is the second in a series of large public meetings that we've had. We've had a number of stakeholder meetings individually with groups. Our other public meeting was regarding the north side of Lexington. So when we were looking at Short and Second, North Upper, North Limestone. This is a combined meeting to talk about the results from the study regarding the core part of our downtown that we looked at, Main and Vine, as well as the south part of downtown, High Maxwell, South Upper, South Limestone. So we're going to have three presentations tonight. One is super short, one is a little bit longer, one is the results are a little bit longer than that. But so a couple items. So one is we're going to have the end of the presentation in terms of public comment. We want to gather everybody's comments on what you're about to hear tonight, the results that you're going to hear. We are not going to leave until we gather every single person's comments, anybody who wants to register their opinion. To do that, we're going to be out in the lobby. Anybody who has a clipboard in front of them, you can go up to them and register your opinion. We're going to have three areas, north area of downtown, the core, Main and Vine, and then the south, High and Maxwell, South Upper, South Lime. So we'll have stations there, and you can go and approach someone at one of those stations and register your opinion, and that'll become part of the study. So again, we'll have three presentations. The first is going to be from the city's head of traffic engineering, Dowell Hoskin Squire. Then we're going to hear a presentation from an expert on downtown economics. So this person named Chris Lineberger is going to talk about why would a city take a look at changing their street patterns. What's the benefit? What's the upside? And then third, we're going to hear from the Stantec team, the traffic engineers that did the analysis for the city. So first, let me introduce Dowell Hoskin Squire. She is the head of Lexington's traffic engineering group.
Good evening. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to stand behind the podium so I can put my papers on it. My name is Dowell Hoskin Squire. As Scott mentioned, I have been the director of traffic engineering for the past 10 months. So relatively new to Lexington, but I'm back to Lexington. I grew up here, and I've been away. I've been in Nashville. I've been in consulting for the past 12 years in Nashville, and I've seen firsthand what downtown revitalizations look like. I think Nashville is a tremendous success story for downtown revitalization. Not all of that obviously is attributed to one-way to two-way street conversions, but I think all in all, it is a true success story. This evening, Stantec will be presenting the results of the traffic analysis. So there are a number of different criteria that can go into a one-way to two-way street conversion, but the purpose of their study was to focus on the traffic impacts of those conversions. And really, those impacts are one part of a whole host of trade-offs that occur when downtowns make these types of decisions, which is really one of probably the most difficult and controversial decisions that a downtown has to make. And as you know, it can be heated among constituents for various reasons. But as some of you are aware, the study consisted of three different analysis areas. One was the south area streets, which is kind of UK would be the primary stakeholder in the south area, but it consists of High and Maxwell and South Limestone and South Upper. And then the study also focused on the core area streets, which are Main and Vine, and then the north area streets, which are Short, Second, North Limestone, and North Upper. So what the results of the study showed us was that in the south area, the costs outweigh the benefits in that area. And in addition, there was a lack of stakeholder support in that area. And to us, it doesn't make sense to move forward with converting those south area streets. The core area, Main and Vine, the study showed that it's doable. But we feel that that discussion and that decision needs to be tabled until two larger projects, pending projects, move forward. And that's the Newtown Pike extension, which will take some traffic off of the downtown streets, and also the Town Branch Commons project. Finally, the north area, Short and Second and North Limestone and North Upper, the study showed that the benefits outweigh the costs for those streets. And really, there's minimal traffic impact in the north area street, but we feel that the benefits of pedestrian safety and an increased circulation, better circulation. If any of you have driven around the north area and you're not familiar, you look at a building and you want to get there, but you've got to go 5 blocks out of your way to get back to that building. So it'll provide better circulation, and we also think it'll be better for downtown business. In addition, just to provide you a little background on about what the Division of Traffic Engineering is doing, because I think there's some parallel efforts that will complement conversion of some of the streets if council decides to approve that. Specifically, we've retimed 75 traffic signals downtown. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but we did, and so that happened within the last 6 months. Additionally, we formed a pedestrian safety working group. As many of you know, particularly in the warmer months, there was an increase in PED vehicular collisions back last fall, and anticipate the same thing to happen in the spring. And so we're taking a focused look at PED vehicle collision locations and identifying specific improvements that we hope to implement over the course of the next 12 months. Finally, Mayor Gray has accepted the US DOT, so the Department of Transportation, issued a challenge to cities, and it's called the Safer People and Safer Streets Challenge. Mayor Gray has accepted that challenge, and through the course of the challenge, which lasts a year, we will be undertaking 7 different initiatives to increase pedestrian safety in the city. So I think, to wrap up, because I don't want to take any time away from Chris Lineberger and from Stantec from their presentation, I think we need to ask ourselves several things. I think we need to ask ourselves, do we want a more vibrant and walkable downtown? Do we want a Vine Street where vehicles travel significantly less than 40 miles per hour, which we recently did a study, and in front of the transit center, the predominant speed hovered around 39 miles an hour? Do we want to improve pedestrian safety downtown? Do we want to draw more retail, office, and residents downtown? And I think, from my perspective, I think the answer to all of these questions is yes. So I do want to introduce Chris Lineberger and provide a little bit of background on his career, but I'm sure it pales in comparison to the breadth of his experience. But basically, what will be presented after Chris's presentation is about the traffic impacts of the one-way to two-way conversion. I think, and what Chris is going to present upon, is the broader economic impacts that revitalizations can have on downtowns. He is an expert on the economics of downtowns. He is both an academic and a practitioner. He heads the real estate department at George Washington University and is a fellow at the Brookings Institution, and he is also a real estate developer. It is my pleasure to introduce Chris Lineberger.
It's been great coming to learn a bit about this town. It packs a punch for being a town of, what, 500,000 people or so, as far as the total metro region. We've got a lot going on here. And this conversation is crucial to your downtown, of course, and it's crucial because of the transportation. The fact is that transportation drives development, and Dow and Stantec did not pay me to say that. But there are 15 infrastructure categories, and transportation is first among equals. So what we're going to talk about is the demand for walkable urban placemaking and how it changes everything. That if you understood how to build the suburbs, you don't understand those rules do not apply as you build a walkable urban place. none of it applies. You have to start with a whole new set of rules and metrics and understanding of what works and what doesn't. So it starts with transportation, driving, development, because there's only two ways of building the built environment. There's drivable suburban, which is you isolate everything from one another, and the only way to get in between one another is by car or truck. And therefore you build highways only. And the only way to get around is by cars and trucks. In fact, it's mandated. You must, if you want to participate in society, you must drive a car or truck, or you can be a chauffeur and drive the 40% of our population that does not drive around so they can participate. And we know what we get, of course, when we build highways. We get drivable suburban low-density development, which is about 95% of your land mass is drivable suburban here in the Lexington area. The other way is walkable urban, much higher density, 5, 10, 20 times more dense, a mix of uses, many, many ways to get to the walkable urban place. And by the way, the walkable urban place is not just downtown. There's downtown adjacent, there's suburban town centers, there's the conversion of regional malls into walkable urban places that are happening all throughout the country. So it's not just bringing back downtown, it's the urbanization of the suburbs as well. But we're talking here about downtown. So many ways to get downtown, but once you're there, it's walkable. And walkability means that it's a limited place. These walkable urban places in these downtowns are anywhere from 150 to 500 acres in size. That's it. Then it feathers back into another kind of place. And like here, it feathers back into single family housing. So back in the early 20th century, we had great walkable urban downtowns. Look at the people on the street. It was bumper to bumper, or I should say belt to belt. And I mean, just huge crowds. That is what downtown Lexington looked like 70 years ago. And it was just as vital as can be. But it had a circulation system that had cars and streetcars, bicycles, and of course, walking. So what changed? What changed is we swung into full gear in the industrial age. In the industrial age, you may not know, but 40 to 45% of all jobs, directly and indirectly, were related to the raw material going into the manufacturing, the sales and servicing, the financing, the fueling, the entire oil industry, and building the roads for the automobile. So it only made sense that as we were seeing the USA in your Chevrolet, that you would build drivable suburban places. The more we drove, the richer we got. Only made sense. So this will demonstrate just how rigorous George Washington University is. I make my students watch a variety of popular movies, and the most important popular movie about urbanism, by far, oh, I should just point this out, that back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, we built primarily walkable urban places. And after the war, we basically pushed that pendulum all the way over and just built drivable suburban. The market wanted it. We in real estate gave the market what it wants. That's what we always do. So here we come to the most important movie of all times as far as urbanism, Back to the Future, 1985. And why is it so important is because it shows the two ways of building the built environment in 3 different periods. And they nailed it with all 3. It was really impressive what those writers out of Universal Studios did. So we start in downtown Hill Valley, 1955, with a vital, walkable urban downtown. So pretty nice place. Plaza downtown, retail on the ground floor, housing or offices up above. Everything's walkable. And you can get there by bus, by car, by skateboard, and of course by walking. So that was how many of us, that's how our the folks that are gray hairs out here, this is how we grew up. But even back in 1955, the seeds of change were planted. You probably haven't seen this movie 20 times like I have, but this is where he parked his DeLorean. And this billboard is advertising the subdivision he was born in, and hence the drivable suburban future. So move up to 1985, and here is downtown Hill Valley in 1985. X-rated movie theaters, homeless on the street, abandoned. The homeless guy behind him, that was the plaza turned into a surface parking lot. We abandoned our cities. We turned the two-way streets into one-way as well. And where did we go? Well, we know where we went. We went out to the regional malls and the business parks. That we built these places around the car and truck. And again, the market wanted it. There was no conspiracy here. So what did happen recently, over the last 20 years, is that the industrial age, we still have a very powerful industrial sector, but it only employs 9% of this, generates 25% of the GDP. But what's layered on top of it is the knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy is comprised of folks that Richard Florida calls the creative class. And the creative class is saying, I want a choice. And sometimes in my life, I'd like to live in the drivable suburban. But at other times in my life, I want to live and work in walkable urban. Give me a choice. Well, in Lexington, there's not much of a choice. You're not offering the market what it wants, at least not in enough variety. And the other thing that's happening is that the experience economy is the next economy to layer on top. And the experience economy is, most of it is driven by urban entertainment, urban experiences. So these two economic futures are demanding walkable urban. It's not to say drivable suburban's bad. It's not to say that the industrial age is over. It's just that we've overbuilt that stuff. And the pent-up demand is for walkable urban. So we started seeing in the mid-90s that the pendulum started going back. Downtown started coming back. And I'll show you some of those downtowns in just a second. So what happened with the movie? They also showed in Back to the Future 2 the near-distant future. And that near-distant future was downtown Hill Valley revitalized. Historic buildings restored, some of them torn down and much higher density projects built, but it had come back to life. And that near-distant future?
The future.
2015. These guys, as I say, nailed it. So the plaza is no longer a surface parking lot. It's back to a common open space. Look at the buildings, look at the people on the street. They got everything right except one thing. So what was that? Yeah, they always promise us flying cars. We never do. So what's the primary reason for this shift as far as the demographics go? Why is the market shifting to demanding walkable urban places? Well, we know who to blame, and it's the damn kids. It's their fault. It's the millennials. It's your kids. And if you want your kids to come and stay in Lexington, you've got to give them what they're demanding. And one of the best ways of knowing about this is through television. I think television has been one of the great predictors of social change because it gives us what we aspire to. And it's got instant feedback loop. And I count there's 6 different eras of television, and they are always projecting a new future for us. Well, when we gray hairs were growing up back in the 50s and 60s, we were listening and watching Leave It to Beaver and Dick Van Dyke and the Brady Bunch, all set in drivable suburban. We aspired to that. And our parents, of course, aspired to that. So one of the best ones is the third week of January of 1957, I Love Lucy, when Lucy decides she's going to move to the suburbs. And so there's a couple clips here that you can understand what she's thinking. So she uses the same concepts that all of us use in moving to the suburbs.
Clean, fresh air, homegrown food. Lucy, you're not thinking of moving, are you? Why not? It'd be great for little Ricky. And Grace took us to see the most wonderful house that's for sale. A quaint old early American.
So this clip, she's looking out over the skyline of New York, regretful that she's about to leave. She's looking out over the back lot of Universal Studios. And there they are, in suburban Connecticut.
Well, here we are. No more tears, honey?
Oh, no, I'm fine now that we're here. Gee, isn't this exciting? We're in our very own home. The first house we ever had.
So this is what many of us grew up with, aspiring to that logic, aspiring to that place. But our kids grew up with something different. Things like Seinfeld and Friends and Sex and the City and Two Broke Girls that all celebrate walkable urban places, safe, vibrant, exciting, walkable urban places. And it really kind of started with Seinfeld.
Hey, you notice they moved where they do the interview on Jeopardy now? Yeah, it used to be right in the middle of Single Jeopardy. Now they do it right after Single Jeopardy.
Yeah, it's much better, isn't it?
Oh, no comparison.
The only show about nothing. But here, it also shows some demographic realities. That those folks are in their late 20s, early 30s. They're not married. They have delayed getting married. They've delayed having kids. And they're enjoying a high-density, walkable urban place. And there's so many people enjoying those things that, as I'm just about to show you, price premiums have been building up. And that's the market's way of saying, build more of this stuff. So there's other reasons than the kids. Baby boomers that are retiring and downsizing and becoming empty nesters were part of this as well. But it really, when you add it all up, basically, we think of households, 50% of households when we were growing up had school-aged children in them. 50% were singles and couples. Today, it's 75% are singles and couples. 25% have school-aged kids. But in the future, the next 20 years, the growth in households, only 14% of that growth will have school-age kids living in the household. 86% will be singles and couples. Singles and couples are the target market for walkable urbanism, which is not to say that children aren't welcome. I live near Georgetown, which is having a boom in kids. And I know this because the millennials, for some reason, love these Cadillac strollers that take the entire sidewalk. You have to walk in the street. But there's this baby boom taking place on the Upper West Side, on the north side of Chicago. The other reason, as I mentioned earlier, is just the creative class is demanding walkable urbanism. And then the final reason is that we thought that we in real estate thought that the car companies were our friends. In fact, they've been eating our lunch. Today, the second largest household category of spending is transportation. Almost all of that is for cars. Turns out you drop one car out of your household, you can increase your mortgage capacity by between $100,000 and $150,000. Cars always depreciate. Generally, houses appreciate. And so our the big change over the next 20 years is going to be as we shift our household spending from transportation and buying gasoline and repairing and insuring and parking those cars to better housing, education, maybe even, heaven forbid, we might save something. So here are the economics of this that we're seeing. This is Atlanta, and we looked at Atlanta and looked at different types of real estate products and looked at it from the yellow bars are the drivable suburban office product, and here's the walkable urban. And you can see that today in Atlanta, the office sector, on a price per square foot basis, that walkable urban office space has a 30% price premium. Retail has a 144% price premium. Rental housing has a 12%. For sale housing has a 160% price premium. Overall, there's a 112% price premium. We're beginning to see the beginning of the end of sprawl in Atlanta, which is the poster child of sprawl. So here's the Atlanta real estate market in the 1990s cycle, in that economic cycle. Only 14% was walkable urban development as far as square footage. In the 2000 cycle, it was 26%. And in this current cycle, it's 60%. And that 60% is going to 1% of their land mass. It's not sprawling all over the place. It's concentrating in less than 1% of its land mass. We're beginning to see the end of sprawl in Atlanta. This is Boston. So you're seeing, and now these are valuations. So this is both the rent premiums or for sale premiums, and it's what's known in real estate as cap rates. So you add the two together and you get what the square footage is worth. So an office square foot that's walkable urban has 134% price premium. Hotels 120%, overall 37%. So tremendous price premiums. Again, this is the market saying build more walkable urban. And again, up in Boston, it was different than the Atlanta study. It was more comprehensive. We looked at 100% of the land use in Metro Boston and 5.5 billion square feet. Nobody's ever managed or bothered to count all that stuff, ever. And so this is a census of all their real estate. And this walkable urban stuff is both the office and hotel that goes into these downtown-like locations and walkable urban neighborhoods, like your neighborhoods north and south here of downtown. So it's the whole kit and caboodle of walkable urbanism. It occupies 5.6% of their total land mass are the walkable urban places. 40% of the population lives there. 40% of the jobs are there with tremendous price premiums. And here is what's happened in the 1990s real estate cycle. 27% was walkable urban. 2000 cycle, 39%. In 2009 until today, it's 46%. So again, gaining market share. The other thing to note, and since the city is doing this study, this is rather important to the elected officials and to all of you taxpayers. The thing we found out in Boston is that walkable urban places on a per acre basis, those that what we refer to as regionally significant, like a downtown, and comparing it to a drivable suburban regionally significant place, a regional mall, business parks, that the regionally significant walkable urban places generate 12 times the per acre tax revenues for your government. 12 times over regional malls and business parks. High density housing, like your neighborhoods north and south of here, generate on a per acre basis 6 times as much government revenue. We didn't know this before. This is a very significant finding that we need to recalibrate where we put our limited capital budget dollars so that we can, obviously, we want to be generating more and more high density places to generate those kinds of tax revenues. By the way, in downtown DC, DC has been urbanizing these last 15 years remarkably. Downtown DC had 90 surface parking lots 15 years ago. It was a place that you wouldn't be caught dead in. Then again, you might have been. And really nasty. Today, there's 1 surface parking lot. It's going under the shovel in about 3 months to build a hotel. Then they're out of surface parking lots. Downtown DC today, or 15 years ago, was just a money pit. It was not returning anything net to the city as far as the city coffers. Today, it generates net contribution $1 billion per year. That pays for the entire school budget.
Every park in DC has now been redone because of this surplus. Almost every school has now been rebuilt, all because downtown has turned around. So here's some examples. Here's one of my favorites, downtown Chattanooga. I've been working on this downtown for 30 years. 30 years ago, this was a post-industrial town, Rust Belt town on its back. And they had turned their back to the Tennessee River. They've now embraced it. They built the aquarium, built the river trails. They put in lots of parks, lots of housing. The baseball stadium went downtown. The football stadium went downtown. All sorts of other amenities. Just a remarkable turnaround. And one of the things they did, this is considered downtown. The shot that you saw was taken from this angle. Over here is UT Chattanooga. And UT Chattanooga was separate from downtown. They just turned their back on downtown. Today they've grown into downtown. Here is the arts section. It's grown into downtown. Here's a heavy industrial section that's now become a big high-density residential section. And then they've gone north of the river and connected it with an old rail bridge that was condemned. They turned it into a pedestrian bridge, the longest pedestrian bridge in the country. And it now connects the North Shore to the rest of downtown Chattanooga. It's just a remarkable place to go. Downtown Ann Arbor, here is what is referred to, what Scott has categorized and has coined a university city, which is what Lexington is. Ann Arbor, where I used to teach, and my daughter is finishing up her PhD, has two different high-density concentrations of retail and office. One's at the university, one's Main Street. There's about 6 blocks in between. Those 6 blocks are filling in with high-density housing. Who's buying it? University of Michigan alums moving back. The #1 place that baby boomers want to move to, as far as the National Association of Realtors, #1 place they want to move to when they retire, small towns. They're moving to Ann Arbor. How about the University of Kentucky alums moving back home? Downtown Asheville has obviously made a fundamental turnaround. Many of you know it. Another one of my little favorite towns, Lancaster, about 500,000 people. Great comparable for you. Major historic stock. They moved their baseball stadium downtown. Big restaurant, urban entertainment. They want to become the Santa Fe of the Northeast. It's got a big arts focus. They have an art school there, lots of galleries. So let me just end by talking about that if you grew up in the drivable suburban age of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and you learned how to build, as I mentioned earlier, you got to throw that all out. None of it applies. That the zoning basically isolated products, different real estate types. The financing was a short-term build and flip orientation because you knew sprawl was going to move demand further out, so get in, get out fast. Real estate became a commodity. I refer to it as the 19 standard product types. That's why the US looks the same no matter where you go. A regional mall looks the same. A strip mall looks the same. It's all the same because it's a commodity. Cars and trucks are the only option to get around. It's mandated. We want to move the cars as fast as possible. That's our #1 job as far as transportation. We build stick-built, wood frame, lightweight construction, stuff that will last maybe 15, 20, 30 years. We want architecture that's outstanding in its field. It doesn't relate to the rest of the context. It turns it back on everything else. And we rely upon the city and county for management of everything. And finally, this stuff is overbuilt. The overbuilding of drivable suburbanism is what caused the Great Recession. It was we built too much of the wrong stuff in the wrong location. It's the drivable suburban fringe that lost upwards of 50, 60, 70% of value. That's what's caused the Great Recession. Walkable urban product went flat. Drivable suburban product, on the fringe in particular, tanked. That's what caused the mortgage meltdown. So what's walkable urban? overlay zones on no more than 10% of your land, maybe even 5 or 6% of your land, that allows mixed-use development, high density. Long-term patient equity, long-term patient financing. You build these things to last. You want to keep them in your portfolio. They're very valuable. You build places that could only be here. They grow out of the ground. They reflect who you are as a people. You need multiple modes to get there, but once you're there, and by the way, biking's a really important mode. That's really critical. It's one of the cheapest modes you can put in place. We're going to see 10, 15, 25% of our people biking around, and it's dirt cheap to put this in. It just takes paint. But once you're there, it's walkable. It obviously is a pedestrian-first kind of development. Cars are invited, but only invited to come on pedestrian terms, which means under 20 miles per hour. And there is some stick built, but a lot of heavyweight construction. You have to build real foundations, real architecture right up to the street. You can't get away with spray-on facades like you can out in the suburbs. The architecture must be in the walkable urban context. It's got to fit with who you are as a people. And you need place management. I think tomorrow I hear that your city council's debating whether you should have a business improvement district downtown. That's crucial. It's the missing level of governance. Hot issue, I see. It is absolutely, you've got to manage these places 24/7. You want people to wake up at 4 a.m. worrying about getting bubble gum off the sidewalk, worrying about how to deal with homelessness, worrying about economic development. And then, as I say, there's pent-up demand for this stuff. And if you don't build it, your kids are going to go someplace else. So today and in the future, walkable urban development is the future of real estate and the knowledge economy. And university cities are primed to take advantage of this trend. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I hope that provided a bit of context for what we're trying to do downtown, making it more walkable, making it more a place where people want to live, work, and play. And certainly transit and what we do with our streets is a big part of that. So tonight's presentation about the results of the study is now going to start with Stantec, who's the consultant on the topic. I believe Rick Day is going to, I think Tom Creasy is going to kick things off. So I'll give you Tom Creasy from Stantec.
I've got a mic, if you'll just hand that to Rick. Thank you all very much. I'll jump right into our next presentation. My name's Tom Creasy. I'm the project manager for this on behalf of Stantec. I'm from Central Kentucky, grew up here, spent most of my adult life here. Also, I have with me Rick Day, who is a senior principal. Rick is actually in charge of our Charleston, South Carolina office, and in a moment we'll talk just a little bit about his experience with this issue. Let us jump right into it, though. So here's our agenda tonight. We're going to talk about what this presentation is about, what has been done, what we found, some conclusions, recommendations, and then where do we go from here. The purpose of the meeting, of our part of the presentation, is to highlight the key issues associated with the potential conversion of one-way streets to two-way, to provide in a summary form the results of the analysis that we have concluded, and as Scott talked about earlier, to get your feedback at the end of the evening. Our objectives were to identify the impacts if the one-way streets that we have were converted to two-way, to identify some potential mitigation measures, practical solutions, and again, engaging the public participation. Just briefly touching on this, some people probably remember this. Lexington first made its first one-way pair back in 1950. And actually I believe it was Mill Street and Upper Street back at the time. and then in the late 1950s made some more changes. Main and Vine became a one-way couplet in 1971. In fact, Vine Street was built as an urban renewal project. What used to be there was a railroad track. Interestingly, one of the reasons for the conversion, and I got to give thanks to Chris King and his staff at the planning department for digging into this, one of the reasons for going with the one-way couplet was with the option that was ultimately selected was it offered wider sidewalks, which the belief was that it was better for businesses. It's kind of interesting, the cycle that we've gone through and where we are. In 1999, we actually converted 3rd and 4th Street, who had been made a one-way pair in between 1971 and then. They were actually converted back to two-way, with the exception of the piece between Jefferson Street and the Newtown Pike extension. Some of you probably remember the downtown master plan that was done back in 2006, 2007. Identified a list of 16 principles. One of those is that the one-way streets should be converted to two-way. The city has done some further advancement of that, particularly with one of the recommendations and considering shortened 2nd Street. There was a companion study that I was involved in that went along with the master plan update. And so there was a lot of public input that was gathered on shortened 2nd Street. This project began 3 weeks ago, utilizing funding from a federal grant that has brought us to where we are tonight. And there's one other thing that's happened. The 4th Street, the piece that was one-way between Jefferson and Newtown Pike Extension, has been converted. It was converted as part of the BCTS construction. So there's the piece of 3rd Street that's still one-way that's out there. But one of the remaining part of 4th Street is now two-way, was converted as part of that. So that brings us then where we are here tonight. Rick's just going to talk just momentarily that Lexington is not the only city that has been dealing with this issue.
That's my point, basically, is... Can you hear me okay? There you go. My point basically is that Lexington is not the only city around looking at one-way to two-way. Number of places, all you have to do is Google a topic and you'll see a number of cities have looked at it, studied it. Some have done it, some have executed, some have not. The one at the bottom, Louisville, Stantec was involved with that, which was converted. So we have been involved with it, a number of these things, but there are a big topic of today's, as we've heard today. This is the city I hail from, Charleston, and Charleston has done a lot of work in terms of looking at their one-way pairs. It's an historic city, so you have limited rights of way to work with. And a number of years ago, traffic engineers turned, two-way streets to one-way streets, and looked at coming back and undoing those, and have done that in a number of places. Upper King Street, Wentworth and Bufane Street, where they did reduce speeds and reduce some crashes, as well as some of the other ones down here, Ashley and Rutledge. I was involved with that as well, and two other one-way pairs down here in the process of being converted back from one-way to two-way. So it has been looked at around the country, and also Charleston, where I'm from. I will say also the process we looked at in terms of analyzing those are the same process that we're looking at Stantec in this process as well. Thank you.
So you've heard a number of the reasons that the conversion back to two-way has been considered. Certainly the issue with pedestrians and interacting with vehicles, and particularly vehicle speed. Dal was talking about the speeds on Vine Street being particularly high there in the vicinity of the transit center. In terms of those speeds and crashes associated with those, lower speeds would mean less severe crashes. The one-way street pattern obviously promotes a certain amount of circuitous travel, that is driving around the block. And so we've actually demonstrated that under a two-way scenario that type of travel is reduced. Going alongside of that, hand in hand with that, is wayfinding for visitors. One of the complaints that we've heard over the years is because of the one-way streets, that people from out of town have a difficult time in getting around. One of the things that we did was we examined the actual visibility of businesses for one-way versus two-way, and it makes sense that if you're driving down a one-way street, as you pass through an intersection, maybe some of the businesses back over your shoulder would be difficult to notice them. And so part of our study actually addressed that issue. Chris talked about pedestrians and bicycles and downtown redevelopment, and so you can see the association with two-way streets on that topic. And again, the business climate, better for business, improved sense of place, all of these are reasons that that this issue has been discussed quite a bit for the last 10 years, culminating in this study. And as has been alluded tonight, this is really the traffic study that we are winding up is really just one piece of a puzzle that has a lot of pieces to it. Some of those are very directly related to the one-way, two-way. Some may be a little less so, but the issue is very complex, and this study in its proper context has just been one piece of that puzzle. A couple other things to think about is that we have some other factors that really, looking at the big picture, that we have to recognize here, and I'm going to talk about those. First of all, something that makes Lexington unique is that we have a compact downtown core. For a city of 300,000 people, our downtown in area, square miles, is pretty small. And then we have a number, in fact, all of our major arterials, with a couple of exceptions, everything leads to downtown. We do have that connectivity with New Circle Road, and to an extent beyond that with Man of War Boulevard. But in between there, we really have limited connectivity. So it's either around the perimeter or to the middle of town for the most part when you are talking about travel patterns. And that's what we have in Lexington. So our typical commute is a whole lot of people, not everybody, but a whole lot of people in the morning going to work in the downtown area or the university area, and of course the reverse is true in the afternoon. New Circle Road is also providing that loop around, that circumferential travel. But the other thing that we learned as we got into a lot of the data, and something unique about Lexington, is that of all the travel downtown, about 35 to 40% of that is passing through the downtown area. And we actually got this from cell phone data that was acquired for use in this study. So we've got a lot of layers of complexity here that were all part of this. There's been a lot of ideas about what this study was doing and what it wasn't doing. So I just wanted to clarify that as part of our meeting tonight. What we did was we quantified the anticipated traffic impacts that would be associated with converting these different one-way pairs, identifying the issues associated with that conversion, identifying where we would anticipate the problem areas to be, and I'm going to talk about a couple of those in a minute, including ways to possibly mitigate those impacts. Providing information to the people that ultimately will be making the decision makers, and again, that public participation, getting your thoughts, getting your input. What we did not do is provide recommendations on streets to convert. We also have not provided any design plans for doing so. But we also have just, this study has really primarily been focused on traffic. So we didn't deeply delve into other things like impact on property values, for example, or we do touch some on pedestrian safety and walkability, but some of the softer stuff that's really hard to quantify, like the friendliness and sense of place, we recognize that it's there, we recognize the importance of it, but we just did not address that. So Dowell talked about the fact that we, and Scott too, that we took the downtown area and we really separated it into 3 distinct areas because those areas have their own unique characteristics, and it made sense to examine each one of those and the one-way couplets that fall within those 3 areas. We used some very sophisticated traffic tools to analyze those, and then the real challenge has been how do we take what comes out of that and then explain that in a non-technical way so that people can be informed and can make decisions. We also did a few other things. I talked about some of the softer issues like that line of sight eclipsing that I talked about previously, and also delving into a little bit into the issues of particularly pedestrian safety. So there are the study areas. I won't go over that. I do want to say that even though we looked at each of these individually, when we considered the impacts, we really considered, that whole downtown area. So we kind of put a shape around all of it and considered the effect on the whole downtown area. In fact, that grayed out area was really our study area from, say, 4th Street down to Euclid Avenue to, say, Ashland Avenue on the east end and just past Newtown Pike Extension on the west end. That was really our downtown area that we studied. Just briefly, to go over what we concluded from the North Area study, and it was actually a couple of years ago that we had a public meeting on that. On our project website, which I'm going to put up again at the end of the meeting, there's actually the technical document that goes over all the details of that if you want to dig into it. We've done the same thing with the south and the core areas, and we kind of did those studies in parallel. Finished the technical parts up of those late last year. On the website, there is a technical report giving all the results of those as well. And then the public meeting for the south and the core areas combined is what we're having here tonight. So again, for the north area, we examined North Limestone, recognizing that North and South Limestone were different, or North Limestone and North Upper were different in character and function than South Limestone and South Upper. So we looked at what happens if we converted North Limestone and North Upper beyond Main Street, along with Short and 2nd Street. As I mentioned before, 4th Street had been converted already. We concluded that when you talk about traffic impacts, using our traffic tools to model this hypothetical scenario, that as two-way, North Limestone and North Upper, Short Street and West 2nd really didn't show a lot of tangible, significant differences compared to those streets being one-way. If they were two-way, we didn't see a lot of difference, just a slight change, but not a lot. Big reason for that is the amount of traffic on the north side is considerably less than in the core area and on the south. So we can look at our network as having some available capacity that's not being used right now. One thing that was not feasible was East 2nd Street. And if you think about it, East and West 2nd really are two separate streets. They don't line up. There's a jog in between, and you can't easily go from one to the other. For a couple of reasons, it would not be feasible to convert East 2nd to two-way. Particularly on the very east end between Race Street and Midland Avenue. It's quite narrow. The on-street parking that's there is used for residences, and for some of those places that's all they have. As a two-way street, that would have to be eliminated and would give those people no place to park. The block of what we call Constitution Street, that Sayre Avenue crosses, there's a lot of pedestrian activity, and there's a whole lot of concern by Sayre School about that being two-way. So for those reasons, it did not make sense really to consider East 2nd for conversion. West 2nd, Short, North Lime, North Upper, in terms of those metrics that we use from our tools, there weren't a lot of differences. However, within that, we also recognize that there are some areas that have some special things going on, special needs that would need very detailed traffic plans on how to mitigate those around the Opera House and Lexington Children's Theater with the events that go on there, school buses dropping children off. Very definitely there would need to be a specific plan if that were going to be two-way. Same thing with North Limestone, with Lexington Traditional Magnet School and with Sayre School. That whole section there from south of 3rd Street to 4th Street, we got a lot going on with two school zones. And so having a way to deal with all that. On Short Street with delivery trucks and businesses, a way to mitigate that. So we realize that there are areas that have special needs that would need to be addressed before any conversion might be considered further. We recognize that there are other potential impacts in addition to the loading zones like buses and the fact that those streets are generally narrower than in the core and the south areas. So buses making turns, and how do you route the Lextran buses through all that? Fire truck operations, a similar situation. Part of the feedback we got from the police department is in the event of an incident, a a grid of two-way streets made it easier for them to divert traffic around an incident, a detour. And so certainly on the north side there would be, as two-way, that there would be a more complete two-way grid. So those were just some of the things that that came out of that, along with some of the other potential benefits, like again, visibility for businesses and slower speeds. Cost for that conversion, somewhere in the ballpark of $1 million, primarily with changing traffic signals, milling off pavement markings, and putting down new striping. So moving over to the south side of downtown with South Limestone, South Upper, High and Maxwell, and then that little piece, what used to be Euclid Avenue, and now we've called Winslow. Now we call Winslow Street. We considered that in the mix as well. One of the things, and I won't delve into the graphs, just try to give you some general numbers. When we talk about the amount of that driving around the block, that circuitous travel, the effect on the downtown area, if we change the south area streets to two-way, will be a little bit of reduction in that circuitous travel, and depends on the time of day, whether it's like 1-2% or maybe 8%. Another thing that we found out is that for the typical trip, though, the travel time would go up within, again, that boundary of that gray shape that I showed you earlier, all right? So less driving around the block, but a little longer within that area to get there to make that same trip. And also congestion would be more. In other words, the extra amount of time that you are delayed on your trip because of congestion. So these measurable impacts that we got from modeling these scenarios for the south area, these are for the whole downtown area. When you look at individual streets as two-way streets like High and Maxwell Street, those travel times would take longer from any point A to point B because of that, because of slower speeds and more frequent stopping. And of course, in our downtown area, the delay primarily comes at the intersections with the traffic lights. So we could expect, because under two-way, we would expect more delay at those intersections, and also longer backups, especially during the peak periods, the peak hour, like the morning and afternoon rush hour. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more here on the next slide. One of the things that we identified for this south area is that these traffic backups would be longer. And in particular, one that we noticed was on South Limestone Street as you're coming in past UK headed toward downtown. This is an aerial photograph so that downtown is up at this part of the screen, and we actually used a computer simulation model. And one of the things that we observed is that those backups we would see going from Euclid Avenue all the way back to Virginia Avenue in the morning. It would be a common occurrence. In fact, possibly longer than that, but our tool stopped at that area, so we really don't know how much farther. But if the south area streets were converted to two-way, one of the things that we definitely would see would be more traffic backups on certain streets. And South Limestone, particularly in the morning, would be one of those. Some of the other impacts associated with that, at these intersections like Maxwell Street and Limestone, or Maxwell and Upper, for example, if two-way, there would need to be a little pocket in the center to make a left turn. So there would be actually 3 lanes, and of course to do that it would mean that in the vicinity of these intersections we would need to get rid of a little bit of the on-street parking, maybe 150 feet or so back on each leg, if you made those two-way, so that you could have the room for that vehicle turning left, because all it takes is one car turning left. If you don't have a separate lane, then it backs everybody up because you got traffic coming in the other direction. So we noticed this effect, particularly in the south area, which means that on a limited basis, some of that on-street parking would be lost. Similarly, some of the bike lanes, so this is on Maxwell Street, just east of Limestone, for that same reason where we need to expand out, those bike lanes would probably need to go as well, at least 150, a couple hundred feet back from the intersection. Then they would pick up again mid-block. And something else that we're not certain about is it also may require relocation of some of the bus stops. That would have to be really addressed on a case-by-case basis, depending on what decisions were made, what changes were made, how the routes were changed, if they were. All right, so for the south area, we concluded that travel times would be longer because of slower speeds, higher delays associated with that increased congestion. Particularly on some facilities like South Limestone, we could expect longer backups, and especially in the morning rush hour, and to an extent that we weren't really certain how far back it might go, because that was the boundary of our traffic model. Again, I talked about, at least in the vicinity of some of these intersections on the approaches, eliminating some of that on-street parking there, and also possibly the same thing with the bike lanes. Cost for that, somewhere in the $2 million range, again, mostly associated with redoing traffic signals and pavement markings. The big thing that came out of this is that there was really just not a lot of interest in going any further with this idea for the south area. From UK, from the businesses in the Woodland Triangle. So that was really our finding, was that there just isn't, to support the conclusions from the analysis, there just wasn't a lot of interest in pursuing this further. And so then the last part is in the core area. Again, this is Main and Vine Street. We started with a number of options for how would you make Main and Vine two-way, and all of these, using these traffic tools, allowed us to do this in kind of a virtual laboratory where we can model this and simulate the impacts without actually having to do it to see what happened. So we identified a number of alternatives. There were a couple that kind of made the cut and went further into really detailed evaluation, and I'm going to talk about those. The first one, and this is an illustration looking back up Main Street at Limestone. It was what we called the 3-lane alternative, which essentially means 1 lane in each direction with a left turn lane, center turn lane down the middle. If there's on-street parking there now, it stays. Same thing with the bike lane. Not bike lane on both sides. If there's currently a bike lane on one side, like Main Street today, it would retain that. But the whole fundamental assumption was we maintain whatever curb-to-curb width is there now. And in fact, I believe that the council established a 44-foot curb-to-curb limit as part of the streetscape master plan back a few years ago. And so we've tried to stay true to that in identifying these alternatives. So that was one option. Of course, because we are really reducing the number of through traffic lanes in either direction, we would expect, in terms of those metrics that we can use to describe traffic conditions, we would expect the biggest difference between that alternative and the way things are today. There was another alternative which we called the 4-lane, and it was essentially 2 lanes in each direction instead of 1. And now my thing doesn't want to work at all. So again, what this does is it gives us a couple of lanes and 2 lanes in each direction. At a number of intersections during rush hour, we would not have a center left turn lane. In fact, because of the heavier traffic volumes, left turns would be prohibited. At a lot of the, what we might consider the minor intersections. And it's some of the most important ones, and anywhere, depending on, we have to really get into a final design to tell you exactly how many, somewhere between 5 and 7 intersections, it would be necessary to actually widen the pavement, to go beyond the 44 feet that's there, because we would need 2 lanes in each direction, plus a left turn lane. We still have a pretty heavy demand to make left turns in some parts of downtown. One of those, today, if you're going westbound on Main Street and you turn left onto Upper to go toward UK, that's a very heavy movement. You have to accommodate it somewhere. So that was kind of a fundamental assumption in this alternative, would be how would we accommodate that. It also means that for a lot of, particularly on Main Street, because that width that's there now would be taken up in traffic lanes, that on-street parking would be lost. Currently, between Rose and Broadway, I think we've got somewhere in the order of 90 plus spaces, and it would mean losing probably about half of those, or up to 50, somewhere in that stretch. All right. So, and same thing with the bike lane. So that's part of the trade-offs that Dow talked about before. When we consider these alternatives, we also got to consider trade-offs. So in a similar fashion that we did for the south area, so what does this do on this driving around the block effect? And we have both the 4-lane and the 3-lane alternatives. Compared to the way we have things today, they both reduce that circuitous travel, and by how much depends on the time of day. And as the main thing to point out is that 3-lane alternative reduces that more than the 4-lane alternative. We're not prohibiting left turns anywhere. You can make the left turns everywhere. So if you look at just from point A to point B, how long it would take to drive that distance, that circuitous travel is reduced more under that 3-lane alternative.
I have to ask a question on that. If you can't find parking,
yeah, it would, and that is the assumption that the parking is there. Okay, so we really didn't get into that. That would be under the assumption that the parking is where you need to find it, but that's a good point. Okay. When we talk about that travel time, again, within that downtown area, it would be longer for a typical trip, and the 3-lane alternative would increase that overall more so than the 4-lane. Same thing with that extra time, that delay associated with more traffic congestion and slower speeds, all right? And we see the pattern here in terms of the impacts is that those metrics that we use that came from our tools to compare with the way things are today, there's a bigger difference between our current one-way system and the 3-lane as there was between the one-way system and that 4-lane alternative. As I talked about before, this is just kind of a summary slide that particularly the left turns with the 3-lane alternative, we have that in the center left turn lane. It goes down Main and Vine entirely, so at every intersection we can accommodate those. Under the 4-lane, if it's off-peak, you don't prohibit it anywhere, but there's not a separate lane to turn from. During the peak hour, in some places you don't allow that at all, which means that you have to go downstream to the next intersection where there's a turn lane. The bike lanes, I did talk about those, particularly under the 4-lane alternative being lost. I do want to point out that the Town Branch Commons has the bike facility that's part of that called a cycle track. So if you want to consider that as not so much being lost as relocated, it's just something to point out that the Town Branch Commons, if one alternative were to take it away, it's not like it would be totally eliminated. It'd just be in a different place. And again, under the 3-lane alternative, the on-street parking is retained if it's there today. On Main Street in particular, under that 4-lane alternative, we think at least probably half of that would be eliminated. Again, I talked about the Town Branch Commons, the cycle track, relocating the bike lanes. The plan for Town Branch Commons is whatever decision is made for one-way or two-way with regard to Vine Street, that it's flexible enough to accommodate that either way. Also, in some of the information I've seen, it does discuss an overpass of Vine Street. We're going to talk about that Vine Street, being able to get across Vine Street and the importance of that issue in just a moment. But there's at least acknowledgement of that issue in the Town Branch Commons plan as well. So just the conclusions from the core area analysis, the 3-lane alternative, when we think about the other modes of transportation, bicycle, pedestrian, even transit, it certainly fits that better, where the 4-lane was really more auto-oriented. Those kind of like the extremes of how you may convert Main and Vine to two-way. Both of those, when compared to one-way, would produce longer travel times, but slower speeds also, but the trips would take longer, the delays associated with that because of that would be higher. When we talk about the effects of congestion and changing that, we saw more of an impact from that with the 3-lane, as you would expect, particularly with the impacts I talked about in the south area and the backups on South Limestone. We saw similar effects, particularly associated with the 3-lane, especially coming in on East Main Street in the morning, traffic backing up, say, beyond Ashland Avenue, on Midland Avenue coming into downtown and backing up to 3rd Street or where it becomes Winchester Road or beyond. So we're seeing that in some areas as well. Also, a likely effect of this would be that our rush hour may become a rush hour in 15 or 20 minutes or whatever. People may wait longer to leave or may come in earlier, so that peak period would just be extended. We certainly have seen that in the growth of urban areas over the years. And while we still pretty much have a rush 60 minutes within Lexington, we could, it's possible that could happen as well as a response to that. In terms of slower speeds being safer, we certainly would expect slower speeds, and any related crashes would be less severe in theory anyway. Would that actually reduce the number? The jury's still out on that. There's a mixture of studies where two-way conversions have been made. Some have showed that crashes did go down, some have showed that they didn't. All right, so we could just say that it's too early to tell about that. Cost estimates on that, the 3-lane was certainly cheaper. There's no extra widening involved. Again, just associated with traffic signals and pavement markings, somewhere in the $1 million ballpark. Under that 4-lane, where some widening at intersections would be required, it would be more expensive. $2.5, maybe $3 million, depending on how many intersections needed to be widened. But again, not to ignore some of the benefits of two-way streets, again, that reduce circuitous travel and thus making it easier for visitors finding their way around town, more routing options on how to get from point A to point B, especially in the event of an incident and detours, and also the visibility for businesses, improved visibility. Just want to talk briefly, this is all not just about automobile traffic, and we've addressed a number of other things that are ultimately going to be rolled into this report, and the mobility plan component, which includes everything, not just the auto stuff. We'll talk just briefly about pedestrian safety. A couple of observations. In our office, the Stantec is on the edge of downtown, so I walk downtown a lot. I sense a need to we need to put a stronger emphasis on downtown is a pedestrian place, and we need to do things to make it more so. I just noticed some of our crosswalks, the markings are becoming old and kind of hard to see. And so if you're a pedestrian, I know that I don't feel quite as comfortable in the middle of an intersection on a crosswalk that's not well delineated. In a few locations, we even don't have the crosshatch. We just have the two bars. And that makes it even less conspicuous that it's a crosswalk. If you're a driver and you're looking over the front of your car and you're at an intersection, which one of those gives you the message that that's a pedestrian crosswalk? Obviously the middle one, or even the bottom, which combines the middle and the top. So the more that we can do to make our crosswalks more conspicuous, I think will make it more pedestrian friendly downtown. Another thing is that we have some signalized crosswalks already. We've got one on Main Street right out here in front of the library. We've got another one in front of Transylvania. There's a type of signal, we call them hawk signals, this high intensity activated, which actually, we don't have a crosswalk right now in front of the transit center, but you go down there any day and you can see people crossing Vine Street, middle of the block, on probably the stretch of streets downtown where the speeds are the fastest. So obviously that would be a location for a type of this hawk signal. And what it does is that basically you can see the photograph on the left. It tells the driver that there's something going on here. It's a pedestrian crosswalk, and it's actually activated by pedestrians so that as you're approaching it as a driver, if there's no pedestrians, then it stays dark. If somebody has pushed the button calling for that, then it goes to a flashing yellow, then to a solid yellow, then it goes to a solid red. The pedestrian gets the signal to walk. Pedestrians walk across the street, then it goes to the PED countdown that we're used to seeing, then tells the driver it's okay to go. So that has been discussed and would be something that we would consider implementing here. A couple of the other things, we already have a number of intersections where we have no right turn on red. It would be, turns on red, both right and in Lexington, Kentucky, if we have two one-way streets, we can have a left turn on red as well. But those can be problematic for pedestrians. In fact, drivers making these turn on red movements typically don't look both ways and only look the way from where traffic is approaching and not in the other direction. And so that's why we don't have them like around UK, for example. They can be particularly dangerous, and we know that anytime that we have add on to that distracted driving along with turns on red, that can be really bad for pedestrians. And there have been a number of times when I've been walking downtown, somebody talking on the phone, not paying any attention, turning on red when I had the walk signal. So we're already prohibiting turns on red at some intersections downtown. One thing to consider is just making the whole downtown zone a no turn on red area. We don't really, it doesn't give us a whole lot of extra capacity for traffic anyway, so it'd be something to consider. And just got a few other slides here. We have one intersection where we have these channelized turns, have these little islands there. And this is Main and Vine and Midland Avenue right there by the Herald Leader. And while it may be very efficient for traffic, as a pedestrian crossing that, you actually have to make like 3 crossings. And I was talking with our 3rd District Council member and his predecessor. That was one of the things that she complained loudly about, was this one particular intersection right here and being a pedestrian safety issue. So maybe one of the things that we consider is just kind of tightening up this intersection and taking out those little slip ramps or whatever you want to call them. Not a whole lot of difference in traffic impact, certainly a lot safer for pedestrians. So we will have some recommendations related to particularly issues like pedestrian safety. But I think we all, from what we've heard tonight, we can include that this is a really complex issue. It has a lot of parts to it, and in some cases a lot of moving parts. When we started this study, the landscape, or what we thought it was going to be for downtown, looked a lot different than what it's looking right now in terms of what we thought was going to happen. So in some ways it's been a moving target. Certainly it has a lot of pieces to it. And we realize now that, traffic is one issue, but there are many issues associated with this. And with these, whatever decisions are made or not made, that there are trade-offs associated with this. I don't think there's anybody in this room that doesn't want downtown Lexington to be a better place. I think that you've all demonstrated that by being here tonight. And also there's been this wait and see about a couple of major things, including Newtown Pike Extension. What's that going to do to traffic patterns downtown? And Town Branch Commons, what's that going to do? And particularly, will we see more bicycle travel? So what type of effect might that have? So we recognize that there's a lot going on here. This is what Dowell said earlier as far as the urban county government's positions. All of this is going to be pending public feedback, bringing the findings to council for discussion with their recommendation to pursue, based on that feedback, conversion of north area streets, starting with Limestone and Upper Street. For the south area, again, pending public feedback, which we want to get from you here in just a few minutes. Bring those findings to council for discussion with the recommendation against, because there just wasn't a compelling support for doing that. In fact, the university was not in favor of it. There was not any support for it. So that was the finding that came from that. And then the core area, to take a wait and see approach. Give all this information to the council, bring the findings that will be documented, and then taking a wait-and-see approach on after Newtown Pike Extension and Town Branch Commons are completed. As far as the other things, I talked about the pedestrian safety. We've got a host of other recommendations that we'll be making related to transit. I know that the transit center, the location of the transit center is a big issue, and I talked with the new director of Lextran, and certainly Lextran is open to considering other locations. Where we have the transit center is a big part of the problem with a long straight stretch on Vine Street and high speeds and not having the ability to cross Vine Street. So we've got a lot of other issues that are addressed, and those would be would really be tackled on a case-by-case basis. So where do we go from here? And I'm going to invite Scott to come back up here as we close this tonight, but we're going to have people out in the lobby area that want to record your comments, because we do want to document everything that everyone has to say and provide that as part of the report. If you don't want to talk to any one person, but you want to write something down, we'll have some forms to do that. I'm also getting ready to show you our project website, which if you want to do it after the fact, there's a link to that where you can provide a comment. I actually had a few people do that after reading the newspaper article on Monday that have already provided a comment. So that's all part of the record. We are coming down the home stretch on this study. Will be the mobility plan is really one part of the study that talks about how you what you leave out there for the decision making, what you recommend to go ahead and do regardless of the decisions are made. All that's going to be available later on this summer, and it will be available for download on the website. Website, there's the address, downtownlexstudy.com. We've had it since the project started. We also have some of the other, a lot of the other reports that have been prepared and generated are on there under that resources tab. So you can click on that and go down to documents, and there'll be a number of other deliverables that were produced as part of that if you're interested in really digging into the details. Scott?
Well, thank you, Tom. All right, we can do that. Thank you, Tom and Rick and Dowell and Chris for the presentations. This concludes the presentation part of the evening.